give you a little background about myself first, and then we'll kick off the future of service for technology integrators. So a couple things. One, my name is Pam Ostrowski, so you guys have seen emails from me. I am now the new leader, champion, and your host today for 1NService. I'm also the CEO of Service Organization Strategies, and I basically, back in the day, helped recruit all of the 1NService members. I wasn't the originator of the idea, but I did the recruiting and facilitated the first 2 years of meetings. So I'm very familiar with the origins of the group, but that was 17 years ago. So over the last 32 years, I've worked with HP, Cisco, Polycom, Extreme Networks, and all of their channel partners because, 3Com, Chipcom, Polycom, all of those guys were very much focused on the channel. So I have spent a lot of time doing this, and I am so thrilled to be launching 1NService. A couple of notes before we get started. Please don't share any confidential information. You are welcome to share your screens. Just text chat, so click on the chat button if you want to show a screen, and we can bring that up without any problem. But in general, we'd like to keep things as public as possible because we are recording, and I'd like to share this to show other technology integrators the value of being part of 1NService. And then from here, what we'll be doing is having a series of these types of topics, and then have a deeper dive for 1NService members where we can share confidential information and go into how do we actually grow our businesses as technology integrators. And then just a reminder, this is only a 30-minute session, so John and I will have to be good about how we carry it out. I've dropped into the text chat a link to a survey to make sure that we're doing the right things for you at the right times. In addition, after this session, there, at the bottom of the hour, we'll have a 15-minute networking. So the go-to meeting will still be open, a 15-minute break for all of us to hang out and network. So for those people who haven't had a chance to chat, that's a chance to do that. So let's get on to our discussion. My guest today is the Honorable John Brakey from Promise PSA and founder of both Promise and Fivel. And I think everybody on the call probably knows John, but he's one of the original people who joined 1NService, and I think he's made some invaluable contributions even in the time that I was there, and of course has received the benefits of this type of form of collaboration, brainstorming with peers, chatting about where there's opportunities, and really helping everybody grow and move forward. So speaking of growing and moving forward, today's topic is really focused on looking back in order to figure out what the future holds. And this is something that a lot of industries do. So let's go ahead and get started. On the display right now, you see some CDs. So sometimes we have to look back to see where we're going. So if you think about it, you look at the music industry or even finance industry, almost every industry does this, where they end up with looking back 20, 30, 50 years for trends in order to figure out, well, where is the industry going? So, John, I'm going to open up the mics, but what you can do is you can mute your own mic or I can mute it for you, but this is interactive, so people can interrupt John and people can interrupt me. So, John, I want to step back for a second and see what's your 2-minute take on the biggest changes that you've seen over the past 20 years, and then we'll throw it out to the group to get your observations as well.
Sure. Well, I think that what I've noticed is that there's been a tremendous shift from product-only sales to a combination of service and product sales for the manufacturers, and more recently, the recurring service sales that you see this with most of the manufacturers. And I think it's, you follow this pattern of how manufacturers have been expanding their internal incentive plans, which now include sales revenue for services that were traditionally exclusively delivered by the reseller. I think also the cloud has changed the relationship between the manufacturer and the customer. There's more emphasis on the use of the product than on the purchase and the deployment of the product. The cloud has diminished the role of the internal IT departments, and the customer's focus is less on buying and managing IT to really consuming IT services. If you look at the large manufacturers, or sometimes we call them vendors, they're appealing to and selling more to the actual non-IT executives and the customer. And we talked about this just before we started about how Microsoft, their executives really sell to the CFO and some of the business units within their customers versus selling to the IT departments. This follows naturally from the cloud-based sales, as it's a new form of really outsourced IT, and that really has an opportunity to really threaten the status of an existing IT department, because they're not buying and managing and operating a whole bunch of infrastructure. All they're doing is buying a service from whether it's Amazon or Google or whoever else. Now, it doesn't mean that IT departments themselves won't buy cloud services, but I think what we want to look at is over time, you'll see that they will not be the liaison to the end user. And then, lastly, I think the vendors are growing their portfolio of application services, which is forcing them to get closer to the business needs and also, more importantly, the end user needs of the customer.
Right. So then the challenge can become that the IT integrator is being left out of the picture here. So, for the folks on the phone, John, you'd mentioned you're starting to see some changes. What have you seen happening over the last 20 years in the evolution of your role and what vendors are doing?
I'd probably parrot everything John Brakey said, actually. There is much more stronger movement. I work with a number of manufacturers, and certainly there is a strong movement to make themselves more directly relevant to their customers through their service offerings. As John mentioned as well, it's very hard for a smaller regional partner to turn up cloud services. So many of the larger manufacturers are again taking that upon themselves to create this large infrastructure that they can then sell at at the operational side and have again different conversations, usually not including IT. So I would parrot that. I think the only interesting thing that I've seen over the past year is some renewed interest in private cloud. In other words, and even the manufacturers are promoting this, more of a turnkey approach to actually have on-prem equipment, facilitating Amazon-like services. So again, that's pretty recent. I think the renewed interest is really because the pricing has finally come down, and it's a much more consumable product versus spending at least $1 million just to kind of enter into the game. So I think that would probably be the only additional thing that I would add. I think it's just very recently.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Dave, any comments on your observations since you play in the government space?
Hi, guys. Sure. Again, from what some of the other guys have mentioned, from a vendor manufacturer standpoint, definitely in the government space, the channel programs have been diluted. They have and continue to do whatever they can to get close to the customer and make the sale no matter what and no matter with whom. And even though we may bring a vendor into the customer relationship, if they see a better channel or a way to capture that business outside of the person that brought them, they will jump on that in a heartbeat. And it's big name guys, little name guys, no name guys. They all seem to be the same bastardized, so to speak, channel programs. And it is frustrating.
Right. So really, we need a key differentiator. Lane, did you have a comment?
No, I agree with what's being said. I mean, certainly the traditional method of the reseller is changing, and it's more about what I see it as a big change towards driving business outcomes and the business value that we need to bring to our customers, right? So that's a big focus that I'm seeing.
Excellent. Okay. So take a look at this slide, Bay Networks, 3Com. Now, interesting enough, Cisco is still very, very available and in the press, and so is Microsoft. Nortel, Wellfleet Communications. So this was our lives 20 years ago. And so what have we learned from our experiences with these manufacturers? John, what do you remember of what the tech integrator's role was back in these days?
Well, I think to my previous point, the manufacturer came to the market, all these people came to the market, and they wanted to offload the design, deployment, operations, services to the integrators. If you look at it, their share price was really driven by product sales as a model of growth. And if they were doing any services, in fact, they were probably punished for it. But today, the product growth is not enough to sustain the rapid growth that they've all enjoyed in the past, or the ones that are still surviving, I guess. Companies like Cisco enjoyed rapid growth by eating the lunch of 3Com and Nortel. Today, they're under threat by low-cost manufacturers, so they need to outscope their emerging competitors by embracing services. Now, this model is not new. I think that we all know IBM did it in the 80s and through the 90s, where they transformed. Originally, they were a product company. They got a little innovative on their leasing stuff, but then they really decided after they took a downturn to come back out again as a services company. And you've seen them actually offload some of their products that they sold to other people. HP and others are working on that similar goal over the last number of years, and are becoming known more as service companies solving complex business problems. The financial markets, and this is kind of interesting, the financial markets, or the stock market, I guess, have accepted that services revenue is the new product sale for these people. And they're going to reward them for increasing their services revenue, which unfortunately is maybe at the expense of some of their integration partners.
Interesting. So what about you guys out there? What have you seen as far as what's happening with margins for services? And even on, product continues to drop, but, what else have we seen?
Well, certainly I think we are seeing margins on traditional services drop, and I think that's where to my earlier point of, I think we need to change the game of driving towards business outcomes, and from that discussion, then we're able to increase the margin becomes less of an issue because you're providing a differentiated offering that most people aren't providing, right? And I think that's absolutely, we're seeing an erosion of traditional margins, and you've got to kind of look at new ways to drive that up.
Good point. And Dave, any comments for your situation?
No, I concur. Again, the government market is a little bit different, and I don't see the commercial side. I don't play in the commercial side at all. So.
Okay. Well, I didn't know, from a margin perspective, whether you're getting pressure.
Oh, we always have. In fact, government sales probably drive the erosion of margins for the rest of the country and all the other markets.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess then the next question is, how do we get margin, right? So these are the logos of the movers and the shakers: Amazon, Cisco, Microsoft, Google. So the question is, where are they headed? And then, are we invited? So with Cisco focusing on the cloud-based environment with remote management and diagnostics, which is something they've been in for a long time, but now the market's ready for it. Microsoft's relationships with its end users, it's not about just selling software through an integrator. It's getting users to adopt technology. You guys have probably all read The Complexity Avalanche by J.B. Wood, and the concept of the consumption gap. And if somebody doesn't know how to use something, and I am a huge example of this, as I'm learning how to use all these different tools right now, with that concept of the consumption gap. John, you and I have talked a lot about Microsoft and how focused they are on user adoption. Do you think there's a role for the technology integrator to help with that aspect? Do you think that's a foot in the door for adding more value?
I think as it relates particularly to Microsoft, but it can apply to all the other vendors, we as integrators need to understand what are the new needs of those vendors. In the past, we talked earlier about, design, deployment, service, and support. If you look at Microsoft, user adoption or usage is top of mind as a major, major challenge for them to prevent revenue erosion in their new model of consumption. For example, when they bought Yammer, they struggled to get users to use it, and they ended up putting together a very special team out of their corporate office that would solve that problem. And interesting enough, that team's role has been expanded to include other Microsoft products. So I think fortunately for integrators, Microsoft is still struggling to solve this problem. What I see them doing is kind of the classic, lead the horse to water and hope they drink it by creating these websites where people can go and volunteer to consume the information. I think they still sort of pursue this old strategy of building content. It brings to mind, I guess, that horse example is the perfect one. So I think an integrator has an opportunity to add value in this new area of services and to promote and track the usage of consumption. This applies also to the traditional hardware manufacturer. Like Cisco was a hardware manufacturer, and they sold equipment that was only really touched by IT departments, and it was all in the closet or in the computer room. Today, as they've moved with the phone to the desktop, they now have an equal number of products that are all really applications, like Jabber and a whole bunch of others. So as they move in that environment, their needs are changing, and I think we as integrators have to understand what are those new needs, and are we positioned to be able to satisfy those needs.
Interesting. So what is everybody else seeing? Lane, I'll pick on you. I mean, what are some other examples where you as a technology integrator can add value and services in this situation? Are you seeing user adoption as one of the roles, or are there other ways that you can add value to the customer and stay in the loop?
Yeah, certainly that is the challenge, right? Is where are the best ways we can provide value? I think to the earlier point, the manufacturers are definitely becoming somewhat competitive in this space, right? And so how do we continue to show value? I still see customers looking for local representation, local support, and I think Dave maybe mentioned, as a resurgence of private cloud comes in, it's that integration with private cloud and public cloud is going to be, I think, our next big push. How do we create, the Amazons, they have a place. We're probably, I don't think we're going to get rid of Amazon or shut Amazon down. So it's how do we work within that? And I think what we're seeing customers go is, I want to have private cloud, but use Amazon where it's appropriate. How do I connect those two, and how do I manage that environment? And potentially that's our opportunity to provide value.
Good, I like that. John Riley, any your thoughts on whether you guys are focused on user adoption or other ways to add value?
Sure, probably other ways. One of the things that I do work with a number of partners with this exact topic, and how can they maintain account control? How can they maintain the relevancy to their customer? When their margins are being eroded, and of course, their services are being eroded. So one of the conversations that I have with them, especially when you take a look at these icons on the screen, when you look at Amazon, Microsoft, even Cisco, and you look at the complete application lifecycle, do they actually encompass that? And the answer is no, none of them actually do. If you look at everything from development to testing to full production to scale to performance and security and user adoption, everything that a particular application goes through, none of them offer the full gamut. When you peel back the onion on the services, they're really missing a number of key elements. So the approach I take is that it's not just that the partner can add value by filling in the holes. And certainly that might be the case. They could work nicely with Cisco, as an example, where Cisco might do some of the services, but the partner kind of wraps, those Cisco services in their own comprehensive approach. But at the same time, it gives a partner a unique conversation where they can, maybe have a little bit more of a competitive conversation and say, well, actually, we do the full life cycle, of your applications, of these specific applications, whereas, this, manufacturer X actually does not. So it's a way to offer more than just value. It's a way to, grow their services. They're going to have to create net new services and possibly get new talent, new skills, on board to do this. But it's a way to put them back in the game fully.
And so that brings us to, are we at their mercy, right, of their innovations as time moves on? Are we always, that little group of people shuffling behind them trying to figure out where the gaps are? So the question then becomes, how do we make sure that manufacturers don't pass you guys by? John, you and I have talked a bit about this and the example of Cisco and their VoIP introduction and how the VAR relationship was handled so differently than in the past. Can you speak to that for a minute or two?
Yeah, I think this is important about what happened with the VoIP, because it sort of is a tell for what could happen in the future. But if you look at it, like, most companies are not very good at doing innovation or disruptive innovation. And this is even true, I think, for VARs and integrators, because there's an inertia within our company that one doesn't want to change. But if you look at the history of services that you've added in your own companies, you may find that they've always been following the lead of the vendor partner. And this was true of the whole migration of network VARs moving into telephony. Now, originally, Cisco had tried to recruit Nortel and Avaya VARs at the expense of the network VARs to become their IP telephony integrators. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess for us, this strategy didn't work so well. So Cisco had to engage the network VARs who prevailed as they, in other words, they dodged the bullet. I guess the question is how will the cloud and application-based services that John Riley has talked about change the VAR's value and its role emerging in the future? And I think that's, as we sort of continue the webinars in the future, those are the things narrowing down and talking about and picking different solutions that may be possible.
So I'd like you to give your frog analogy, because I think that that's a pretty scary and very applicable analogy for what we're doing,
right.
What's happening right now in the industry.
There is, I don't know how many people have heard the frog analogy. Ironically, it's technically not true, but it really is a great metaphor. And that is, if you took a frog and you dropped it into a pot of hot water, it would jump out immediately, seeing that it was danger. But if you put that same frog in a pot of cold water and then slowly heated the water, it would just sit there and then cook, because it doesn't see the gradual change. So, and that's really indicative of human nature, is that when we're in the moment, we don't see the change happening, and that's why you have to stand back. If you look in the financial market, there's a great example of that day traders look at what's happening day to day, but the professionals really look at the long term. They look at a 12-year trend or a 20-year trend and so forth. So I think the frog analogy is one that we have to be very wary of or scared of, that we don't become the boiled frog.
Right, exactly. Does anybody have any examples of watching a dynamic like Cisco and VoIP happen and feel like, but we have that capability, we have those skills, we have that expertise, and yet you weren't wrapped into the fold, so to speak? I realize these questions are kind of being sprung on you, so you might not have an example of that, but give that some thought, because when we think about what's the value that your company offered to customers 10, 15, 20 years ago, and the other follow-up question, which everyone is asking, which is, what is the value I'm going to add 2 to 5 years from now? If I bring up soft choice as an example, one of the detail points that I'm sure you guys have heard ad nauseum, it seems to be the most popular statistic right now, is that customers actually get about 90% of the way through their buying cycle before they even bother to reach out to a salesperson, an account manager. And so the question then becomes, if you go to your website, do you look and feel like a tech integrator who can help be part of that channel, of it being in the game, so to speak? So I brought up their site, and then also to the point of Microsoft and their site, they're all about talking to the end user. There's a sales number at the top of this site, but it's why Azure products, documentation, pricing, downloads. There's some partners listed here. So if we click on that, you get a display of Azure partners will help you get your business up and running in the cloud. So there's a point to them, but do they know that it's you? Do they know where you fit in that picture? So John, is the new role of the VAR or solutions provider that really of an integrator between Microsoft, Azure, and Cisco and Amazon, much like what John Riley was talking about?
I think, Pam, the Achilles heel for all vendors is that they're reluctant to support their competitors' products or services. If you look in the early 90s, the VARs or integrators were glued between the router manufacturers and the hub manufacturers. When those two platforms were glued together and assembled in the assembly line, then the VARs needed to find new things to glue together. And in our case, it was when telephony and networking sort of came together. That was our new glue capability. But I think if you look at what are the new things to glue together, you look at the customer and say, the customer will not likely go exclusively with Amazon or Azure or any one particular solution. So what they need is they need someone who can actually seamlessly operate and support both platforms or multiple platforms in offering unique, and that's their unique value. So I think our goal is to identify where are those new places where your glue is going to be appreciated and, of course, rewarded with the customer.
Good point. Now, John Riley, you'd mentioned you do have an example of kind of being passed over because a vendor didn't understand what value you were bringing or that you had these capabilities necessarily.
Sure. And actually, to tie into John Brakey's point as well on the integration side, I think a good example, going back to the IP telephony days, and then once again when virtualization first kicked in, and then once again when cloud automation tools started to kick in. I actually have a number of examples where, as a VAR, as a VAR, almost the identical thing happened every single time. Is that on a technical level, we delivered perfectly. In other words, it worked. Although the project was a failure, the customer's perception of success was not there at all. And what we failed to do as an integrator in gluing all these things together, which was great, we did a phenomenal job, is the expectations weren't set properly, and quite frankly, tying to the business and tying to what some of the key stakeholders actually cared about. And I'll give you one example. In Toronto, Canada, when we started talking about the sacredness of dial tone to partners in a law firm, and they looked at me and said, "We actually don't give a crap about dial tone. We would just want our color phones on our desk before our competitor wanted our color phones on their desks." So that's one of the examples that we totally missed being actually relevant to the business, but meanwhile we technically delivered perfectly on that project. So I guess my point is, as an integrator, absolutely, being the glue to bring everything together is crucial. But I think now that's expected. I think the next integration that partners need to do is bring IT integrated with the business, and in many cases be that translator and help to to tie these projects back to the actual business outcomes and the business care abouts. So I think that's really the next step that should be focused on.
And that's an excellent point. So to get to, since we're at the bottom of the hour, boy, that went fast. For the next Collabonar, and we have to decide, these are monthly topics, but what we'd like to do is share your story. So what solutions has your company come up with to address the future of services of technology integrators? So John Riley, you just gave some examples. John Brakey did. Lane, I believe you did as well. So what I want to do is give you a call and talk about, a short success story, and then we can all kind of get back on and talk about, what you're doing moving forward, but more importantly, with the group of 1NService and its true nature, which is to say, what if you added this? What if you did that? So doing some brainstorming and talking about how to improve these services, because this is critical, right? Nobody wants to be the frog at this point. So a couple of housekeeping details. Save the date. We're going to do this every Wednesday, first Wednesday of every month, and we will continue to talk about and do deeper dives on this topic. Also, within a couple of weeks, you'll be getting a podcast link to top 3 risks of not moving to a cloud services model with my guest, George Malore from Cloud Readiness. So that'll be coming to your inbox. And then I would encourage you to take a look at the new 1NService site. It's under modifications right now, so it looks a little different now, but it doesn't look completely different, which it will look a little bit different moving forward, because there's links to things you didn't have links to before. Also, the social media LinkedIn group is active, so please go to the LinkedIn 1NService group and give your thoughts on the Collabonar and add some additional detail. But if you have things that you're announcing for your company on either Twitter or LinkedIn, let's make sure we're connected. Follow me, I'll follow you, and we can make sure that we're part of the buzz. So this is the new way of doing business, right? If we want manufacturers to pay attention to where we are, we need to have thought leadership and we need to be vocal about it. And then, of course, if you're interested in moving forward with a membership, and I'll be reaching out to you guys to talk about how we can add more value. But this link right here is the membership page, which is really all about what's included with membership, because I get that question a lot. And then finally, we're going to hang out for the next 15 minutes or so. But if you do need to go, here's the link to the surveys. But remember that we'll be doing this every month, and you'll be hearing a lot more from me. So thank you so much for your participation.